Everybody, Jake here with TrendSpider to go over the weekend video. As always, we're going to go over the broad market ETFs, go over VIX, and then go over actually the 10 charts that we went over last week to see how those charts materialize, just to learn a little bit and look at those setups. So starting with SPY, we have this anchored VWAP from the swing low that we've been watching for a while, as well as the handoff anchored VWAP here from the October 2nd low. Nothing's really changed too much with this chart. We still even have this kind of broadening flag formation here forming, and we'll have to see if this thing finally is going to make a move at some point. But this is definitely something to keep in mind going into the week ahead. However, we also want to look at this possible double top scenario. Now, we are showing kind of a hammer here forming on the weekly side of things. The way I look at a hammer is I want to see a hammer at the bottom of a trend, not necessarily in this little bit of a flag. However, this is showing that there was some buying conviction with prices nowhere near where we bottomed at this week. So that's something to keep in mind for the bullish case. But all in all, a pretty neutral week going into the last week of October. Now, going into the Qs, we have a pretty similar setup here. We have the anchored volume by price and the anchored VWAP here. If we anchor the volume by price, remember you can just move this over. We'll start it from this swing low here, and you can see we actually tagged this this little volume node here shown by this area around 280. But then what I really want to point out here is this area that we were looking at last week on the weekly side of things. This kind of middle line of best fit trend line that really acted as a nice level of resistance here this week, or last week into this week with continuation this week. So definitely a very broadening type formation here. We'll just have to see which way price wants to go. Do we retest the lower trend line here? We'll just have to see. A lot of uncertainty going into the elections, but you know, we'll just have to see what happens. Nobody really knows what's going to happen. That's the beautiful thing about the market. Now, on the IWM side of things, this is what kind of gives the bull case a little bit of momentum here. IWM is actually holding very well, and IWM is generally looked at as the risk-on type of ETF. The Russell 2000 is something kind of like the small caps, or not kind of like, it is the small caps, but the small caps kind of have that sentiment where if there's strength in small caps, you know, risk off can't be that big of a deal because we're still seeing a bid on IWM, both on this bull flag trying to break out here. We finally closed above this resistance area. However, the main thing I wanted to point out here is the fact that we did actually bounce off this previous level of resistance once again this week. Actually closed green on IWM, shockingly. So that's definitely something to keep in mind for the bull case moving forward, kind of a risk-on scenario here. Now, let's go into VIX before we touch on all the 10 charts that we went over last week. And you can see, I mean, VIX is really just trading in this very tight horizontal range here. And yeah, we're just kind of stuck. Now, on the weekly side of things, you can see here that we do have this very strong rounding base. As we always say, VIX is not something that you can really chart out with any meaningfulness. However, it is interesting to see this base forming here. We'll have to see if it actually holds or this is just kind of pointless and we fill this gap below after elections. But all in all, definitely a very stagnant week on pretty much all ends. Now let's go into the charts that we looked at last week. PayPal was the first one we looked at, and if you guys remember, we're looking at this particular candle here from October 16th. There was a lot of volume at the top of the range here within this wick, and then we had a pullback to this support line, which actually created the support line at this point. You can see here we're connecting this point here, then we connect this point. So this actually was kind of the secondary data point here for this trend line. And then you can see we also respected it again on October 20th before making the big move up when PayPal announced they're going to do some stuff with crypto. Now, we are still holding above the anchored VWAP from this September 18th low and the handoff candle here from September 24th. So buyers are still in control, but we are starting to break down through that support zone. But you know, trend lines are meant to be broken. There's a lot of undercutting going on right now, i.e., you know, it looks like this the support line is going to hold, breaks down, and then continues up. So this is definitely a tough time for people who are trading on the technical side because you are having some things that are being undercut and then reversed right after. So just keep that in mind going into the next few weeks with the uncertainty in the elections. Now, we also talked about the ascending triangle on the weekly. We did try to break through it. However, we did not actually close through this red line that we highlighted last week. So not the strongest candle. We'll have to see what happens going into the week ahead. Next one is Walmart. Walmart is one that did have a little bit of a pullback. We are still forming kind of this bullish pennant here. You can see that we pretty much just retested this horizontal level of resistance. So let's see if this area holds going into the week ahead. Next one up is GE. GE is one that we were talking about last week where we were identifying that area of resistance that was broken through. If we move this to raindrop, we are looking at a lot of that volume within the top of the range last week. And then we actually had another raindrop very similar to that here. And then that really was a nice move up. And we even had it on this particular candle here yesterday on Thursday. And then we had a nice move up. However, you can see that there really isn't a lot of conviction by buyers today on Friday after, well, it's after market close on Friday. But today during market hours, just not a lot of conviction by buyers here at the top of the range. So the weekly candle does show a continuation after last week's breakout. So let's see if this continues. This is where I would really like to have a weekly raindrop to see kind of what's going on within this wick. And I promise they're coming. It's on the roadmap. I can't wait to get them out at some point in the coming months or next year. So NIO, this is one that we were talking about last week with some of that volume at the top of the range was pretty much non-existent. So if you guys remember, we were talking about this area here. Not a lot of volume, not a lot of conviction by buyers. We did have a pullback after that. However, we are kind of flagging now, so that's something to definitely keep in mind. But also to keep in mind, we do have this big gap here below that is unfilled. And, you know, even if this did move down, as long as we're holding this area, we're still in a pretty strong uptrend at this point. The weekly candle shows that we barely closed above this area. And I have to admit, this is one of the weirdest weekly candles I've seen in a while. Just very small range, just kind of doing its own thing, trading right at the top of this, I don't want to call it a channel because it's barely narrowing, but pretty much this very slight ascending wedge, if you want to call it that. If we scroll back, you'll see it kind of slowly narrows to a wedge here, but pretty much looks like a channel here just at this point, but it is very slightly narrowing. But all in all, not too much action here, but we are seeing that possible bull flag here on NEO going into the week ahead. DKNG, Donkey Kong, DraftKings, whatever you want to call it. Every time I see DKNG, I almost say Donkey Kong, and so I might as well just say it here. Now, the one thing about DKNG that we want to highlight here is the fact that if we anchor the volume by price from this area where these two trend lines start, you can see this area, yes, it's a volume shelf, but the price is still below it. So the price is actually going to initially have some trouble getting through this because this is overhead supply. Now, if the price can get above this area, this is when we get into this volume gap above, which is essentially a very low liquidity area. And in the past, from different case studies, we've seen price move very quickly through this area to the next supply zone above. And remember, this is a supply zone because everybody's holding at a loss that bought in the $50 to $53 range. As the price gets back up to this area, supply starts to hit the market because everybody now is back to break even. They're like, all right, I'm throwing in the towel. I just dealt with a 15-20% drawdown. I'm out. That adds to the supply, break-even supply, and that's why we call this a supply zone at first. Now, let's turn off the anchored volume by price on the daily, turn it on the weekly. Let's anchor the volume by price, something we talked about last week from this kind of capitulation point here. And you can see this anchored VWAP from this March low and this volume shelf was exactly what we were looking at last week to see if we held. We bounced off of it almost perfectly. So this could be an area, especially 3 very red weeks in a row. You know, after that type of move, you generally are going to get some type of reversal. We'll just have to see what happens going into the week ahead. But not really hating this current weekly candle here on DKNG. Going into Target. Target was one last week that we were talking about some of that volume not at the top of the range on last Friday. And you can see here that we did continue down after. Now, we did have a little bit of volume above this area the next day, but this is something where I'd actually want to start the resistance here now because we already attempted to break through it here. this was the next high that we needed to get through, and you can see there just wasn't enough conviction by buyers above this line, and then we had a nice move down afterwards. So just because there's volume at the top of the range, it really needs to be volume at the top of the range around an important area of resistance or above an important area of resistance to really show that conviction. Now, we did have a little bit of volume at the top of the range, but like I said, we're not at a resistance zone right now or a support zone. Now, if we do anchor a volume by price from, an anchored VWAP, there is still quite a bit of room down until everybody's back to break even, or at least the equilibrium price is back to, or the price is back to the equilibrium price since the September 8th low. Remember, the anchored VWAP is essentially just the average price per share paid since a particular point in time. So right now, there are a majority of shares on average are still holding at a profit compared to the average price per share paid, which is around 156. So can we continue to pull back? We'll just have to see. The one thing that kind of scares me here, I don't want to say scares me, but something to definitely note, we do have some divergence here. Notice lower highs on the Williams percent range, higher highs on price. So anytime you have this discrepancy or this inefficiency here, it's definitely worth noting. So that's why I do kind of mention that the anchor VWAP is below if we did continue down into next week. So target, a little iffy here. Zoom, another one that's showing some pretty intense negative divergence, and we're really showing this negative divergence right at this 10.618 extension. So what I did was I did our measured move from the initial June 2019 high down to the October 2019 low. And then you can see from this measured move, we pretty much are trading right at this 10.618 extension. We also have negative divergence. Notice here higher highs on price, however, lower highs on the Williams percent range. So this particular value here is negative 0.3, and then this area is negative 1.92. So it's actually lower here, lower high, higher high on the price. So anytime you have that type of discrepancy, it's definitely worth noting. So negative divergence on the weekly on Zoom. Let's see how it plays out. Amazon is next. Yeah, Amazon is a little iffy here as well. We've got this big old dome here, essentially, this rounded top. And then if we turn off the anchored volume by price and we anchor it from this low, you will see a little bit of strength here. If we anchor it from this point here, you can see that we're trading right at this area. However, like we talked about on DKNG, this is initially going to act as an area of supply, which it has. You can see there's not a ton of volume at the top of the range on this candle or this candle, and that to me says there's not a ton of conviction by buyers yet, and we are still below the Alpha Trends anchored VWAP from September 21st, so definitely something to keep in mind going into the week ahead, and obviously this kind of rounded top forming here. Are we forming a head and shoulders as well? We'll just have to see. Can this absolutely rip up in the coming weeks? Absolutely. Anything's possible in the market. Technical analysis is just really a guide for us to get an idea of where prices can go, what they're showing, but never a guarantee. Now, FSLY is something that I want to go over because we were talking about this Alpha Trends anchored VWAP from the March lows here. And you guys can see here, if I turn off the volume by price, turn it on the weekly, this is kind of exactly what we were looking for, right? We were talking about this anchored VWAP being undercut a little bit simply because that's what happened here in May. And so, this is kind of exactly what we're looking at. Now, the problem is where do we go from here? We're kind of right at this volume shelf since the March lows. You can see here that we're essentially moving this volume by price bar here to the March low candle. We're seeing a lot of that volume focused here. Now, is this distribution or accumulation? That question will be answered in the coming weeks after price action does its thing. However, we are still in this kind of broadening formation here. On the daily chart, you can see that we did have quite a few days down. Finally, a green raindrop here after like literally 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 or more days. So finally, we caught a bid right at this Alpha Trends anchored VWAP, and we'll just have to see what happens going into the week ahead. However, this was kind of a crowded trade. I mean, once we dropped, I saw a lot of people saying they were doubling down, averaging down. And, anytime you see that, it's kind of like, it seems like too many people are confident in this one. And we did continue to drop after that. So let's see what happens. But going on to the last one, CRM, we're in this really, really tight downward range here. We'll have to see which way this breaks. On the weekly side of things, you can see here that we are trading right back at this this volume shelf, which initially acted as a launch pad for price a couple weeks ago. Now we're right back here. Remember, this area shows that everybody's now back at break even. As everybody's back at break even, supply is going to dry up because they don't have profits to sell anymore. And if you guys do want to learn more about the supply and demand side and the logic based on how this works, definitely check out our economics supply and demand 2 videos that we posted earlier this week, talking about how can prices move up without an increase in demand, and how can prices move down without an increase in supply. So if you guys are trying to kind of figure out the logic on how this price action works around these shelves, definitely check out that video, and that should help you with that. So that is the weekend video. I hope everybody has a great weekend. Happy Friday to those that are watching this tonight. This should be released here in a couple hours. I'm thinking around 8 p.m. Eastern time today, Friday. So if you guys have any questions, always comment below. Remember, we do have a 7-day free trial if you want to try any of these different features out. And if you have any questions, let us know, and make sure to like and subscribe if you enjoy this video. Thanks so much.